Hello and welcome to Stories of Science. Here, we look back on humanity's long journey to understand the world. The questions, the failures, and the breakthroughs that slowly changed how we see the universe and ourselves. We tell science as stories.
Hedy Lamarr, more than a movie star, the hidden genius behind modern wireless tech. Hedy Lamarr, the kind of woman who once seemed like she stepped straight out of a dream. On screen, she wasn't just beautiful, she was perfect. The kind of face that Hollywood built legends around. That deep gaze, that effortless elegance, once you've seen her, you don't really forget her. But here's the twist. What if everything you think you know about her is only half the story? Because yes, Hollywood saw her as a beauty icon, a screen goddess, a classic leading lady. But as the saying goes, don't judge a book by its cover. Behind that image was something almost nobody expected. Born in Vienna in 1921, Hedy didn't exactly come from nowhere. But her path was anything but ordinary. By her mid-teens, she was already on screen, and by 16, she had gained attention that most actors only dream of. Directors wanted her. Cameras loved her. Hollywood couldn't look away. And then, she surprised everyone. At the height of her fame in the 1940s, while most expected her to stay exactly where she was in front of the camera, playing roles written for her image, she made a completely different choice. World War II was raging, and instead of just staying in Hollywood's spotlight, she turned her attention towards something far less glamorous and far more powerful: technology. Together with composer George Antheil, she helped develop a wartime communication concept known as frequency hopping. At the time, it sounded almost impossible. The idea was simple but brilliant. Radio signals would constantly switch frequencies, making them extremely difficult to intercept or jam. In other words, invisible communication protection, decades ahead of its time. And yes, that Hollywood beauty icon was part of it. Let that sink in for a second. The same woman who was considered a cinematic dream was also thinking about secure military communications. As the saying goes, never underestimate quiet minds in loud places. This wasn't a movie script. This was her real life. And that's exactly what makes her story so fascinating. Because Hedy Lamarr wasn't just the glamorous face on the screen. She was someone who questioned her own limits, stepped outside the role society gave her, and quietly helped lay groundwork for technologies that would only be fully understood decades later. Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, modern wireless systems. All of it connects back, in part, to ideas she helped shape. So when you look at her, you're not just seeing a film star. You're seeing someone who proved that beauty and intelligence don't compete, they coexist. And honestly, that's where her real legacy begins. Hedy Lamarr, born Hedwig Kiesler on December 16, 1921, in Vienna, Austria, didn't exactly start life as a Hollywood legend. Her family was well off. Her father worked in banking, and her mother came from a high society background. But here's the interesting part: she wasn't raised to just be pretty and polite. Far from it. Her parents focused heavily on education. She grew up in an environment filled with music, dance, and culture, the kind of European upbringing where art wasn't a hobby, it was part of daily life. And it showed. From an early age, Hedy stood out. Smart, curious, and undeniably charismatic. She did well in school, but classroom success wasn't enough for her. She was drawn to the stage, dance, theater, music, anything that allowed expression. As the saying goes, you can't hide talent for long. By 16, she was already in films. Her appearance caught attention immediately when she appeared in Ecstasy, often referenced in early film history as her breakthrough phase. But at that stage, she wasn't given much depth as an actress. More image than character. Still, that small exposure changed everything. By 1940, she made a bold decision: leave Europe and head to the United States. Her family supported the move, believing she needed a bigger stage. So she crossed the Atlantic straight into Hollywood's spotlight. And just like that, her American chapter began. In 1941, she signed with MGM, one of the biggest studios of the time. On paper, it looked like instant success. But reality was slower. Hollywood didn't see her as a leading actress right away. They saw her as a face, a look, a type. Most of her early roles leaned heavily on that image: exotic, mysterious, beautiful. In films like Algiers, she had limited dialogue and even fewer chances to show range. The camera loved her, but the scripts didn't challenge her. And yes, she noticed. But instead of stepping back, she leaned in. She worked on her English. She studied harder than people expected. She pushed through roles that didn't fully use her talent, knowing that sometimes, as the saying goes, slow and steady wins the race. At first, she was boxed in: beauty first, acting second. Many roles were built around her appearance rather than her performance. The classic Hollywood pattern: glamorous woman, supporting the male lead, minimal depth. But over time, something shifted. She began landing more varied roles. Films like The Strange Woman and others in the 1940s gave her slightly more space to explore character, emotion, and presence. Still not perfect, but progress. And that's the key point. Because Hedy Lamarr's early Hollywood years weren't just about fame. They were about adaptation. About learning how to survive in an industry that saw her as decoration, while she quietly worked on becoming something more. Not just a screen presence, but a performer with control over her craft. And little by little, she started to break out of the beautiful facebox Hollywood had placed her in. Hedy Lamarr's Hollywood journey didn't start as smoothly as people often imagine. Yes, her beauty made her instantly noticeable, but as she quickly learned, in Hollywood, looks can open the door, but they don't keep it open. Her first Hollywood film, Treasure Island, gave her exposure, but not depth. She was there to be seen, not truly developed as a character. More decoration than performance. The kind of role where the camera loves your face, but forgets your voice. Still, she didn't stop. Instead of accepting that limitation, she pushed forward, looking for roles that could challenge her more. She wanted to prove there was more to her than just appearance. By the 1940s, she had become one of Hollywood's most recognizable names. But recognition didn't mean freedom. Most of her roles still fit the same pattern: the beautiful woman in adventure stories, the glamorous figure in romantic plots, often placed beside action but rarely given real depth. As the saying goes, old habits die hard. And Hollywood had very old habits when it came to women. During filming, Hedy began to notice something uncomfortable. It wasn't just about her, it was about the system. Female actors were often valued more for how they looked than what they could do. Talent came second, sometimes third. But she didn't walk away. Even in roles she felt were limited, she worked with discipline. She studied, improved, and treated every performance as practice for something bigger. Little by little, things started to change. She began landing more varied roles. Still within the boundaries of Hollywood genres: adventure, romance, drama, but with slightly more room to breathe. Films like The Strange Woman showed glimpses of her range beyond the pretty face label. It wasn't a sudden transformation, more like a slow breaking of a frame. But the pressure never fully disappeared. Hollywood in that era had a strong mold for women, and Hedy often found herself pushed back into it: the exotic beauty, the mysterious woman, the glamorous trap in the story. It was repetitive, and she knew it. As she later reflected, breaking out of that image wasn't easy. When the system is built a certain way, you don't change it overnight, as the saying goes. Yet she kept going. And that persistence mattered. Because over time, she stopped being just a decorative presence on screen. She became an actress with growing control over her craft, someone who understood both her limits and her potential. Her Hollywood career, then, wasn't just about fame or beauty. It was about resistance: quiet, steady, and persistent against a system that tried to define her too narrowly. And that's what eventually allowed her to stand not just as a star, but as someone who helped reshape what a woman in Hollywood could become. During World War II, something shifted in Hedy Lamarr's life. She wasn't just a film star anymore, she was a public figure in a world on fire. And slowly, she began to realize something important: she could do more than act. In 1941, she started supporting the U.S. war effort, not as a symbolic celebrity, but with a real desire to contribute. As the saying goes, when duty calls, some people step forward. And Hedy did exactly that. But what came next surprised almost everyone. In 1942, she met George Antheil, a composer with a rebellious, experimental mind. At first glance, they were from completely different worlds, Hollywood glamour and avant-garde music. But somehow, they clicked. And the conversation turned technical. Wireless communication, radio signals, security in wartime. Here's the unexpected part: Hedy wasn't just listening. She was thinking, questioning, contributing. She had long been interested in technology, especially how communication systems worked. She understood something simple but powerful: wars aren't only fought with weapons, but also with information. Together, they came up with an idea that sounded almost futuristic at the time: frequency hopping. The concept was bold. Instead of sending a signal on one fixed frequency, the transmission would constantly switch between different frequencies. Like a moving target. Hard to track, hard to jam, hard to break. In simple terms, communication that keeps jumping so the enemy can't catch it. A Hollywood actress helping design military communication security? It sounds like fiction. But as the saying goes, truth is often stranger than fiction. In 1942, they filed a patent for the idea and submitted it to the US government. The technology wasn't fully developed for immediate wartime use, but the concept was ahead of its time, decades ahead. And later, it would quietly become part of the foundation for technologies like Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. But Hedy didn't stop at the idea stage. She actively worked on it. She drew designs. She studied radio wave behavior. She discussed timing, synchronization, and how two devices could stay in sync while constantly changing frequencies. One of the biggest challenges was coordination. How do you make both sender and receiver switch frequencies at the exact same moment? Their solution was clever: a mechanical system inspired by a player piano roll. A device that could coordinate precise, rhythmic switching, almost like music translated into engineering. And that's where her artistic background quietly mattered. Music and engineering started to overlap. By November 1942, they officially secured the patent. A small document at the time, but with a massive future impact. It didn't change the war immediately. It wasn't used widely on the battlefield then. But sometimes, as people say, you don't see the value of an idea until later. And later came. Meanwhile, Hedy was still at the height of her Hollywood fame. One of the most recognizable actresses in the world. Red carpets, studios, attention everywhere. But behind that, something had changed. She began paying more attention to science, communication systems, radar, wartime technology. Not as a hobby, but as a second calling. In interviews from that period, she hinted at it: she didn't want to be limited to the screen. She wanted to understand how the real world worked behind the scenes. And more importantly, how she could contribute to it. By 1942, she fully committed to working with government-supported tech efforts, while still maintaining her film career. A rare double life: Hollywood star and wartime inventor. Over time, she became deeply involved in the logic of the system itself, not just the idea, but how it could be used in reality. And she valued that work more and more. Because in her eyes, contributing to something that protected lives mattered more than applause. That chapter of her life would later be seen as one of her proudest achievements. Even though frequency hopping wasn't widely deployed during World War II, its long-term influence was enormous. It quietly became part of the DNA of modern wireless communication. So when we use Bluetooth or Wi-Fi today, we are, in a very real sense, still connected to that idea. Looking back, Hedy Lamarr's transformation is striking. From silver screen icon to a mind shaping the foundations of communication technology. And maybe that's the real lesson here. Beauty and intelligence were never opposites. They just rarely got the chance to work together in public view. As the saying goes, never judge someone by the role you first see them in. Hedy Lamarr proved there was always more behind the image. Hedy Lamarr's life was never just about movies or inventions. There was another layer to her, more private, more complicated, and honestly, more human. Because as the saying goes, no one lives a single story. Behind the Hollywood glamour, her personal life moved through highs and lows. She was married 3 times, and each relationship added a different chapter to her story, none of them simple. Her first marriage came very early, in 1939, when she was just 18. Her husband was a wealthy businessman. It wasn't a fairy tale start. But interestingly, during her early career in film, he gave her space to grow professionally. That freedom mattered more than romance at the time. Still, it didn't last. By 1941, the marriage ended. Some pointed to her rising career and constant work. Others simply said they were growing in different directions. Hedy herself later admitted she wasn't fully happy in that relationship. And after the divorce, something shifted in her mindset. She became more focused, more determined. As the saying goes, sometimes endings are new beginnings. But her love life didn't stop there. In 1943, she married a film producer. This time, there was more shared understanding of Hollywood life. He knew the pressure, the schedules, the chaos. That helped for a while. But even then, it wasn't smooth. Two people, two careers, one complicated industry. Eventually, that marriage also ended. Then came her third marriage, to a businessman who was more focused on stability and family life. With him, she had a son, and for a time, life became quieter, more domestic, less chaotic. Not perfect, but calmer. And through all of this, something important emerged. She was constantly trying to balance two worlds: ambition and family, work and personal life, fame and normality. As she once reflected, she didn't want to choose only one version of herself. Because, as people say, you can't pour from an empty cup. Even in the busiest years, she tried to be present for her children. Home, for her, wasn't just a place, it was a kind of emotional reset. A space away from cameras and expectations. But Hedy was never only defined by work or relationships. She had a rich inner life too. Music was one of her biggest passions. Classical music, especially. She played the piano, and it wasn't just a hobby, it was part of how she thought. Rhythm, timing, structure, all of that later connected, in surprising ways, to her ideas in technology. There's a quiet connection there, art shaping science. She also loved gardening. In the middle of Hollywood chaos, she would retreat to her garden, planting flowers, taking care of plants. A small, private world where nothing was rushing. As the saying goes, still waters run deep. And then there was cooking. She enjoyed it, especially traditional Austrian and Italian dishes. For her, cooking wasn't a chore, it was therapy. Something grounding. She once joked that when life got overwhelming, she would just go into the kitchen and cook herself a full meal as a reward. A simple kind of joy. That sense of humor showed up often. She didn't take her beauty icon label too seriously. In fact, she often laughed at it. At one point, she joked that Hollywood might think her job was just to get more and more beautiful on screen and nothing else. That self-awareness mattered. It showed she understood the absurdity of the image she was given. Even in interviews, she kept that playful tone. When talking about learning radio technology, she admitted she didn't understand it at first. But then she said something very her: if she could learn piano, why not learn this too? Simple logic, quiet confidence. And that combination, humor, curiosity, and independence, made her feel less like a distant star and more like someone real. Not just a glamorous figure on screen, but a woman trying to figure out life, like everyone else. Hedy Lamarr is often remembered first as a Hollywood star: flawless beauty, elegant presence, the kind of screen icon people couldn't ignore. But as the saying goes, there's always more than meets the eye. Because her real impact didn't end on the movie screen. Her work with George Antheil on frequency hopping slowly became one of those ideas the world only fully understood much later. At the time, it wasn't widely recognized. It didn't make headlines, but it quietly planted seeds in the future of modern communication. Years passed, then decades, and in the 1990s, something changed. As wireless technology exploded, mobile networks, early internet systems, and digital communication, engineers and researchers began looking back. And suddenly, Hedy Lamarr's name reappeared, not as an actress, but as a pioneer. People realized her wartime idea had helped shape the foundations of technologies like Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. As the saying goes, good ideas never truly disappear. They just wait for the world to catch up. By then, her image had already started to shift. She was no longer just the beauty of Hollywood. She was becoming a symbol of something bigger, a woman who crossed boundaries between art and science. Her contribution was being re-evaluated, not just in technology history, but in culture itself. And in 1997, she finally received formal recognition for her scientific contribution. For many, it felt like history correcting itself, a late but meaningful acknowledgement. Ironically, her work in communication technology ended up leaving a longer legacy than most of her films. That says a lot. So what does Hedy Lamarr really represent today? In modern terms, she is often seen as a symbol of crossing boundaries between industries, between expectations, between identities. She didn't stay in one box. She refused to. In Hollywood, women were often treated as decoration. But she quietly proved something different: beauty and intelligence are not opposites. They can exist in the same person, at the same time. As the saying goes, you don't have to fit into one shape to have value. Her story wasn't just a transition from actress to inventor. It was a rare combination of both worlds: creativity and discipline, visibility and quiet innovation. From the glamour of the silver screen to the technical foundations of secure communication systems, she moved through spaces that rarely overlap. And she didn't ask permission. That kind of independence is what makes her legacy stand out even today. Because her story challenges a simple idea that people must be one thing or another: career or family, beauty or intellect, fame or substance. Hedy Lamarr lived as proof that life is far more layered than that. If she could look back today, she might say something light, something with her usual humor, maybe like, "Funny how I'm remembered more for frequency hopping than for my films." A line like that fits her well. Playful, self-aware, a bit ironic. But underneath it is something serious. She was never just one label. Not just a star. Not just an inventor. Not just a public figure. She was all of it at once. And maybe that's the real takeaway from her life: people are not single stories, they are collections of them. Hedy Lamarr's life feels almost unreal when you look at it as a whole. Hollywood fame, scientific innovation, public recognition, but none of it fully defines her. Because as the saying goes, a life is bigger than its highlights. She didn't just move from movie screens to technology history. She showed something deeper: how a woman can move between identities, between expectations, and still stay true to herself. And that's why her story still matters today. Hedy quietly challenged an old idea that a woman's value is only tied to appearance, marriage, or family role. Instead, she showed something very different: that value also comes from curiosity, ambition, and the courage to create something new. Or as people often say, you are more than what you are seen as. She lived that idea, not just talked about it. In today's world, where many people, especially women, balance careers, families, and personal dreams at the same time, her story hits differently. It feels relevant, almost practical. Because she proved that you don't have to choose just one version of yourself. You can be many things at once: a professional, a parent, a creator, a thinker, and still be whole. As the saying goes, don't put all your life in one basket. Hedy's journey reminds us that modern life doesn't demand perfection in one role, it asks for balance, adaptability, and self-belief. And maybe most importantly, confidence to keep moving forward even when roles change. If Hedy Lamarr were alive today, she might laugh at how people still define her in simple terms. She might say something light, something ironic, like, "Honestly, I could do anything. I just couldn't do everything at the same time." A simple joke, but it says a lot. Because behind it is acceptance of limits, of choices, of time. And that's something everyone understands. Her life wasn't just about achievements. It was about growth. About trying, failing, reinventing, and continuing anyway. And maybe that's the real message she leaves behind. Not that you must become one great thing, but that you are allowed to become many things, over time. And your story is still being written.
The people who change the world usually just think one step deeper. If this story made you see things differently, hit like, subscribe, and save it. See you in the next story.